welcome to this week's episode of the Good Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so before we get into this week's tasting, you probably all want to know the answer to last week's competition. And just a reminder of the question. The question was, what well-known image did I plagiarise for last week's intro picture? And of course the answer was it's an album cover, an album by Emerson, Lake and Palmer called Pictures at an Exhibition, which I think was a live album. So I have here the winners, and I have a hat, not my hat, I hasten to add. So there was a few of you who got it right, and congratulations to those of you that did. And there was a few of you, well, nobody replied with the wrong answer, shall we say? So one assumes that those who didn't reply didn't know what the correct answer was. So anyway, let's pick this week's winner then. So I've got it here in my hand, and the winner is Shane Leahy. Well done, Shane. If you want to see, I don't know whether you can quite make that out, but it is indeed, Shane has indeed won. So congratulations, and I'll obviously be in touch in due course. So like I said, a big thank you to everybody that entered the competition. I'm sorry you couldn't all win, but that's the nature of competitions, isn't it? Somebody has to win and everybody else has to lose. So anyway, that's that out of the way. And this week's episode of the show is sort of a re-evaluation episode, if you like. And the reason I'm doing it is because back in 2007, I cut my teeth on competition judging when I was asked to take part in the Independent Bottlers Challenge for the Whisky magazine, and was a regular on that until about 2013, when I think that was the year that I then started doing the World Whisky Awards, and they kind of obviously dropped me off the list for one reason or another. But this year they asked me back again, and so I've been tasting whiskey, which is such a hard job, it has to be said. But one of the interesting things is that one of the categories that I've got this year is Campbeltown. And I thought, what would be an interesting episode of the show is to basically look back at the last time that I did Campbeltown for the Independent Bottling Challenge, which was in 2012. So we have a selection of samples that were entered for that year's Independent Bottlers Challenge 5 years ago. Wow, doesn't time fly? Hopefully the samples have stood the test of time, because there's not an awful lot of them, volume wise anyway, but I had a good sniff beforehand, and they all seem to be okay, but obviously we'll see when we get there. And I think one of the interesting things is certainly from the early years of the Independent Bottlers Challenge is the number of entries, certainly for this year. I mean, I've got 40 odd. And I had grain, which then there never used to be a grain category, so it shows you how how people have become interested in these types of whiskies, which is brilliant, because I'm a big fan of grain whiskies. Campbeltown, like I said, obviously. Lowlands, not a huge amount in that for obvious reasons. And the other interesting category I got was non-Scotch whiskies, which again seems to be implying that the demise of the independent bottler that was forecast a few years ago has not appeared, and they are in robust shape and bottling not just Scotch whisky, but obviously whisky from all around the world, America and wherever. So I think this year's competition certainly looks like it's going to be interesting, and from the quality of the entries, I've not tasted what I would consider to be a poor quality whisky. There's a few that I guess were not as good as some of the others, but certainly I think overall the quality is very, very high. And I mean, I remember a few years ago when I was probably a little bit more actively involved in the whole competition, getting in touch with the loads, pretty much every independent bottler I could think of at the time, saying, look, you've got to support this competition, you've got to send the samples in, because the independent sector is for me more important than anything else, and that's probably why they asked me to be a judge on it, because I'm a big fan of the independent sector. And anyway, so what we're looking at today is Glen Scotia. Now, obviously back in 2012, the bulk of the samples entered into the Campbeltown category were from Glen Scotia. There was a handful of Springbanks. And I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Glen Scotia, because it's kind of like the lesser well-known of the two distilleries. The sort of wouldn't quite say the the ugly kid in the corner, but certainly, when people think of Campbeltown, obviously they automatically think of Springbank, and I suppose it's kind of, Glen Scotia is not unloved, but certainly I remember when I first started in the industry, the range consisted of these dumpy little green bottles with an absolutely horrendous label. I mean, it was awful. I mean, it was supposed to be sort of typically Scottish, but it really looked quite awful, it has to be said. And then all the age statements just disappeared, and for a number of years all we had was a basic 12-year-old in quite a simple packaging. I think it was a sort of a kind of greeny bluey tube with a sort of an oval kind of label, and then they must have had some kind of brainstorm or brain fart or whatever it's called, because suddenly then we had all these different changes, pretty much one after another. Some bright spark decided they were going to release the range with cows on the tin. I mean, they were bizarre, it has to be said. I mean, multicoloured and what have you, and some of the bottlings were exceptionally good. And I've been a big fan of what they've been doing, and certainly the current series of releases, which I think I reviewed some time ago, are probably the best series of bottlings I think that the distillery has done to date. But anyway, we're not talking about the distillery per se today. Obviously we're talking about the independent bottling companies, and one of the nice things about judging this particular competition is that I get to taste stuff from independent bottling companies that I don't generally have any dealings with. So it's kind of nice to see what the likes of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, Wemyss, and what have you are kind of up to, I suppose. And we have a couple of their bottlings here today, so I think that's probably enough waffle for now. So time to introduce the lineup. Life's supposed to be like what it's all about. Right, okay, so we're going to kick off today's tasting with an 11-year-old Glen Scotia. This was bottled by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. It is bottling 93.45, and one of the things I really like about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottlings is, of course, the humorous names they tend to give their bottlings, and this one was obviously no exception, and it was called An Unusual Sweetie Shop, and was bottled at 57.6%. Incidentally, in the 12 years old and under category, this was the silver medalist. The second bottling in that category we look at was the gold medalist, and this was bottled by Cadenhead in their Duthies range. This is a 12-year-old Glen Scotia and bottled at 46%, so we shall see what that one's like. The lone bottling I've got in the 13 to 20 years old category is bottled by Malts of Scotland. This was a single sherry hogshead, the cask number being MOS 12031, distilled in February of 1992, bottled in May of 2012. This incidentally was the silver medalist. It was bottled at 51.9%, and I think, if memory serves me correct, the gold medalist in the category went to a privately bottled long row. I forget who the bottling company was, but I think that was the one that got the gold in that category. So on to the 21 years old and over bottlings. We're going to look at the silver medalist first. This is bottled by Single Malts Direct in their Whiskies of Scotland range. Distilled in 1991, I imagine bottled in 2012 at 55.1%. So we shall see what that one's like. Second bottling we'll be looking at was the gold medal winner. This was bottled by Scotch Selection. I wonder whatever happened to them. I just haven't seen anything from them for a number of years now. But back then they were quite an active bottling company. I think owned by the Speyside Distillery, I think, if memory serves me correct. Anyway, so this is a single sherry hogshead, cask number 1058. Distilled in 1991, bottled in May of 2012 at 53.8%. And the final bottling we'll be looking at is a Wemyss. This was a 21-year-old, bottle of 46%. Again, another sherry butt, distilled in 1991, bottled in 2012. And like the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottlings, they tend to give them funny, humorous, or what have you names. This one was called Strawberry Strawberry Ganache, sorry. I'm guessing hinting at the character, although Strawberry Ganache is not a character I would normally associate with Glen Scotia, possibly with Auchentoshan, but certainly not with Glen Scotia. And that kind of brings me on to another point, actually, thinking about Auchentoshan, is the whole use of sherry. As you well know, I find it hard to get my head around distilleries like Auchentoshan that produce a like elegant spirit that just want to basically then blanket it in sherry. But in Campbeltown, it kind of seems to take on a different characteristic. To me, the Campbeltown spirit, both Springbank and Glen Scotia, has the sort of like the depth and the guts basically to deal with sherry quite nicely, and it seems to be almost kind of part and parcel of the overall character. It seems to me, certainly with Springbank, you have that kind of gritty kind of tannic sherry character, and it seems to sort of work really nicely with the spirit. Even, you know, using first fill Oloroso doesn't seem to sort of overwhelm the character of Springbank itself. And there are a few other places where you could probably say the same, but certainly you know, places like Auchentoshan, for example, you know, I personally prefer to see it you know, bottled from an American oak cask, or casks in the plural. And so yeah, there we go. I think that's probably enough of that. I think it's time to make a start on the tasting. Maybe you know. Right, okay, so like I said, back at the beginning of the show, I haven't tasted these for 5 odd years, so it's just going to be interesting kind of going back to them. So anyway, let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Quite light actually for a Glen Scotia. It's got a herbalness, there's a kind of a classic maltiness, there's a bit of fishiness to it. And actually it's kind of got more of a sort of spey kind of character, a robust spey character than Campbeltown. Certainly I think if I was tasting this blind, I'd be hard pushed to sort of like put this down as a Glen Scotia, although like I said, it has that lovely sort of maltiness. But aside from that, forgetting, you know, that kind of observation, it's actually a really nice nose. Like I said, plenty of coastal notes, quite fishy, oily, quite aromatic in actual fact, lots of barley, nice and fresh. Whether I would quite go as far as saying an unusual sweetie shop, I can see what they're kind of getting at. I don't really get too much of a confected character, but it's got a sort of a sweet barley edge, should we say. So yeah, okay, maybe you could say barley sugar possibly, but anyway, pleasant, really quite pleasant nose, I think. Let's see what the palate gives us. darker, maltier, more like a Campbeltown whisky. Definitely some sherry notes going on there, some spice, some dried fruit, tar, licorice, more malt than you can throw a stick at. A little bit tannic, spicy. Certainly don't get the sweet shop kind of reference, it has to be said. Like I said, doesn't really come across particularly confected. In actual fact, it's got a kind of quite natural, classical Campbeltown kind of character. Like I said, a little bit tannic, but certainly the tar and the malty notes are all kind of keeping that sort of nicely compacted. Not quite as gritty as, say, Springbank sherry, but certainly it has that natural kind of character, and I think that's a really good start. So let's move on to the Cadenhead Duthies. Now, in my initial tasting notes, I put down refill sherry ? So see whether I was indeed correct or not. It would certainly seem to imply that. It's got a faint kind of dried fruit note. I imagine if this is a refill sherry cask, it's been pretty well refilled, shall we say. It's very, very subtle on that. Again, it's quite oily, malty, deep. Again, sort of more at the lighter end of the spectrum, not quite as light as, say, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottling, but still has that wonderful maltiness that I associate with Glen Scotia. A little bit of spice. Yeah. I think sort of like out of the two so far, if I was purely judging them on the nose, I think I got them the right way round. This certainly has more what I would consider to be sort of, you know, classical Campbeltown character, and certainly Glen Scotia kind of character. Anyway, let's see what the palate gives us. A little bit of peat on the finish, a little bit of earth, oxidised fruit. Feels a bit older than 12 years old, it has to be said. It's certainly got that maltiness again, the licorice, the treacle, the what appears to be sort of relatively obvious sherry character, and a little bit of peat. Just got a little bit more going on the palate, I think, over the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottling. So I think on this re-evaluation, I think I certainly got them. Well, again, can't remember what I actually scored these particular ones, and didn't actually bother to look that one up in actual fact. But I certainly think that they ended up the right way round, shall we say? I can find out what's true. Right, okay, so let's move on to the malts of Scotland. Let's see what this gives us then, shall we? Slightly heavier on the sherry, a little bit more sort of like dark toffee, treacle, touch of burnt wood. Again, some nice coastal notes, some maltiness. It's a robust whisky, it has to be said. Certainly got that sort of burnt driftwood and possibly a little bit of peat maybe. But it's also got a slightly lighter side as well. I'm certainly getting a little bit of barley, a little bit of violet. There's some smoke now coming through. Quite sort of, like I said, burnt wood smoke, and there's a little bit of almost kind of like green wood smoke as well coming through. That is, yeah, real barbecue-y nose, it has to be said. You know, this is the sort of thing you'd probably just stick on your barbecued meat and shove it on the barbecue. You know, it's just, oh, lovely stuff. And this is sort of, like I say, this is the kind of time when I kind of really get into a sherry cask whisky, when it's not all blanketing. Like I said, when it kind of works in with the spirit and sort of, you know, gives you these kind of other dimensions. And this is when sherry casks kind of, to me, kind of come into their own. So, let's see what the palate gives. wow, that's really smoky. Big, malty, licorice, tar, treacle. Like I said, touch of burnt green wood, a little bit of peat, a little bit less of the sort of spirit character, I guess, on the palate, and more focused on the sherry cask. So kind of, I love the nose. I'm not kind of sort of, you know, singing and dancing about the palate, but yeah, it's really intriguing. It's interesting. It's a little bit short, which may well have something to do with the fact that the sample is quite old, more than the actual failings of the spirit, shall we say? But yeah, not a bad whiskey. Right, and let's move on to the first of the 3 21-year-olds. This is the Whiskies of Scotland, bottling by Single Malts Direct. Let's see what those give us on this end. Lighter, kind of don't really get any real sherry. There's a little bit of spiciness in the background, but I'm guessing this is probably more likely to be American oak, and certainly looking at the colour of it, it would seem to imply that. Quite malty again. There's some nice barley character. It's got a touch of maturity. There's a little bit of almost strawberry fruit. Well, don't know where that came from. I can see where kind of this would have been quite apt for strawberry Ganache. There is a strawberry note, and I'm kind of probably talking myself into it. The more I talk about it, the more I can just smell bloody strawberries. Yeah, it's kind of robust. It's got a little bit of oiliness, a bit of fishiness. Yeah, it's an interesting, intriguing kind of nose. I mean, what was this? This got silver. So yeah, I can kind of live with that. It's got a sweetness to it, like I said. Yeah, pleasant. Let's see what the palate's like. Actually, on the palate, it might be a refill sherry cask. There's certainly a little bit of dried grape, a little bit of a wininess, less of the the strawberry, thank God. Not that has its place, but like I said, don't kind of quite associate that with Glen Scotia. Again, quite malty, which is a distinct characteristic of that particular distillery. A little bit of treacle, a little bit of tar. A little bit of old rope, not quite Hessian, but sort of, a little bit of almost like rope-like notes. Touch of tannin on the finish, a little bit drying. Again, that might have more to do with the age of the sample rather than the quality of the whiskey itself. But again, it's got loads of character, loads of personality, and just to me, just says, I'm a Campbeltown malt. Good. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Scotch selection. And like I said, I mean, I used to deal with these guys and used to regularly stock their bottlings, and pretty much like every independent, they bottled some good stuff and they bottled some not so good stuff. And I think, if I remember rightly, I did indeed actually stock this one particular bottling, and I don't think they were that badly priced. Probably in line with all the other independents, I would imagine. Anyway, let's see what those is. Definite refill sherry. Slightly high toned in actual fact. Quite elegant in actual fact. It's got a nice kind of slight nuttiness. A little bit of apricot, almost some white fruit as well. Sort of underlying maltiness. The maltiness seems to be kind of sitting back in the aroma profile, and it's certainly got quite an aromatic character. And like I said, I'm certainly getting more of the nuttiness now. I mean, maybe this was possibly an ex-Manthanier sherry, but possibly. It's got some lovely barley notes, a bit of dustiness, some nice light vanilla as well. That is a lovely nose. It's kind of dense, malty, but elegant at the same time. I think this is kind of, you know, quite, you know, I think gold medal was perfectly apt for this, certainly, if the nose is anything to go by. Anyway, let's see what the palate gives us. A little bit more tannin on the palate, a little bit more darker treacle and tar and malt. But again, I'm getting the barley character. It's wonderfully balanced. A little bit of saltiness, a little bit of peat, some oxidised fruit. Definitely feels like it's got some lovely maturity to it. It's got a, but the saltiness is giving it that kind of crisp, almost kind of tart edge to it. Very long, really impressive spirit, it has to be said, and yeah, definitely worthy of the gold medal, I think, in my opinion. Finally, on to the bronze medalist. Let's, like I say, this is quite a dark colour, so and like I say, I definitely know this is a sherry butt. So let's see what the nose gives us. Again, quite malty, dark. There's a little, very faint whiff of sulphur. I mean, it's kind of in there with, and I think sort of sometimes certain whiskies like Glen Scotia that have a big personality, a big sort of maltiness, can kind of almost kind of get away with it. Sometimes the peated malts kind of get away with it because it kind of gets all wrapped up in the peat character, and you might not necessarily pick it out. But there's just a very slight blemish, which is why I think it probably didn't win. And again, it's got that sort of lovely kind of luscious, moist, fruit-cakey sherry. A little bit more heavier on the sherry, I mean, which is not surprised given the colour of it. I'm certainly getting some malt, but I'm not kind of getting much in the way of barley or anything else in actual fact. So it is a little one-dimensional. But I think, if you like this kind of style of whiskey, then obviously it's going to appeal to you. To me personally, like I said, the Scotch selection just seemed to have, a little bit of a better balance personally. But there's a touch of woodiness kind of coming through now. Let's see what the palate's like. A lot of sherry. Quite dry and quite tannic. Again, a little bit short, but I'm guessing again that's probably more to do with the condition of the sample rather than the actual whiskey. Strawberry Ganache, don't see it at all. Certainly doesn't have any strawberry character or Ganache character, or possibly a bit of dark chocolate maybe. Obvious sherry character of treacle. There's some maltiness as well, but it's a bit sherry focused, shall we say, which to me is the less interesting of the three 21-year-olds, but certainly a little bit clear. I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of a dirtiness just there, and I know some people kind of like that kind of dirty sherry notes, and certainly they like their Campbeltowns with a bit of dirtiness. I mean, it's not too intrusive, it has to be said. It's sort of worked in with the overall characteristic of the whiskey, but like I said, it's just a bit more sherry focused than the other two, and hence I think why it got the bronze medal. So yeah, interesting finish. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of the Show in the Bag. I don't think you're going to get hold of any of these particular bottlings these days. You might find the odd one or two of them on auction sites, but I imagine most of them were bought and drunk at Glen Scotia. It's not sort of something you're probably going to stick in your collection. Although in saying that, I think I've got a 40-year-old 80 Rattray bottling in the collection, which was, that was a monster if I can remember rightly. But anyway, coming back to today's tasting, the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottling, yeah, I didn't think that was too bad at all. Really quite interesting, you know, fresh, light, and possibly a slightly more unusual Glen Scotia, although it certainly seemed to have some of the maltiness and the depth that I associate with that particular distillery. The Cadenhead's bottling, yeah, like that. I thought that was really impressive. Again, that seemed to me more Glen Scotia than the Scotch Malt Whisky Society bottling, and you know, I guess that sort of the difference between them is kind of splitting hairs, I suppose, at the end of the day. But like I said, with all competitions, somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. But the Malts of Scotland bottling, yeah, well, pretty heavy on the sherry, but you know, there was a lot of other things going on at the same time. Yeah, you had the burnt wood, you had a little bit of peat, even a touch of barley kind of coming through, and I guess this is the sort, like I said, the sort of sherry cask whiskey that I kind of like, when it is not just all about the sherry cask, that you're getting some other characteristics as well, and certainly I think that kind of showed it. The single malts direct bottling, yeah, again, slightly on the lighter side, nice delicacy, well, in relative terms I imagine. I don't think delicate is ever a word I would kind of naturally associate with Glen Scotia, shall we say, but and that's not doing it a disservice at all. It's just sort of like the way things are. So yeah, a nice bottling. Scotch Selection bottling, yeah, I think that was kind of whiskey of the afternoon. That was certainly impressive. It was balanced. It had sort of, yes, it had some bit of sherry character, but I was also getting the character of the spirit, yada yada yada, etc etc. Keep saying it, but to me it is. It's just all about the balance of flavours. I mean, I'm the same when it comes to you know, first fill American oak. Sometimes you just get too much oak character. You get too much of the sort of the vanilla and maybe the herbal kind of rye kind of notes as well and things like that. And you're thinking, well, you know, yeah, that's all well and good, but you know, where's the distillery character? Which brings us obviously on to the Wemyss bottling, which, although not a bad bottling, yes, there's a bit of a blemish there, it has to be said, which kind of, I imagine, sort of knocked it down a few points. But again, it was pretty much all about the sherry cask, and to me, the least interesting of the three. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Certainly for me it was an interesting kind of you know, look back at bygone bottlings. You know, next week I've got no idea what's in store, but there's a lot of I seem to have a lot of samples, shall we say, sat on the kitchen worktop, so I don't think I'm going to have a shortage, and I think there's going to be a really interesting tasting in amongst all of that lot, which I'm glad I'm going to be doing. But anyway, that's probably getting a bit ahead of myself. So congratulations to Shane, the competition winner. Like I said, I will be obviously in touch, and for all of the rest of you, maybe I'll run another competition in another 200 odd episodes. Yeah, maybe that might be one to do with the 300th episode or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, so all that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.